What happens when a country music superstar sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find herself facing questions that cross every professional line imaginable? What starts as a simple promotional chat quickly spirals into the most uncomfortable 12 minutes ever captured on camera, culminating in one of the most dramatic walk-offs in entertainment history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And drop a comment below letting me know what you think about celebrity interviews that go too far. Now, let's get into what really happened behind the scenes. The Nashville studio was buzzing with typical pre-interview energy. Carrie Underwood had arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, dressed in a crisp white blazer and dark jeans. Her signature blonde hair perfectly styled. She settled into the plush burgundy chair across from Bryan White, the veteran radio host known for his decades in country music journalism. The lighting was soft, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal. "Carrie, welcome back to the show," Bryan began with his trademark warm smile, leaning forward slightly in his chair. "It's been, 3 years since we last sat down together?" "Something like that," Carrie replied, crossing her legs and adjusting her blazer. "Time flies when you're constantly on the road." "Thanks for having me back, Bryan. Always a pleasure." The pleasantries continued for the first few minutes, covering her latest album, upcoming tour dates, and her family. Bryan's questions were standard fare, the kind Carrie had answered hundreds of times before. She spoke about her creative process, her inspiration, and the challenges of balancing motherhood with her career. Her responses were polished, genuine, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had mastered the art of the interview. "Your fans have really connected with the vulnerability in your new songs," Bryan said, shuffling through his notes, "particularly the track about forgiveness. That's clearly coming from a very personal place." Carrie nodded thoughtfully. "Music has always been my way of processing life's experiences. When you've been in the public eye for as long as I have, you go through things, you learn things about yourself and about people around you. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do is put those emotions into a song." "Speaking of things you've learned about people," Bryan said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "There have been some interesting rumors circulating in Nashville lately about your relationship with your management team." Carrie's posture stiffened slightly, though her smile remained in place. "I'm sorry, what kind of rumors?" "Well, word is that there's been some tension, some disagreements about creative direction. Some people are saying you've become, let's say, more difficult to work with as your success has grown." The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Carrie's publicist, standing just outside the camera's view, shifted nervously. "This wasn't the direction the interview was supposed to take, Bryan. I'm not sure where you're getting your information," Carrie said, her voice maintaining its professionalism despite a slight edge creeping in. "My team and I work very well together. We've been together for years, and our success speaks for itself. But surely there's some truth to the stories about you firing 3 different assistants in the past year." Carrie uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. "I think we should probably stick to discussing my music and my upcoming projects. That's what my publicist told your producer we'd be covering today." Bryan chuckled, but there was something calculated about it. "Come on, Carrie. Your fans want to know the real you, not just the polished version. They want to know what it's like to work with someone at your level of success. The real me is someone who treats everyone with respect and professionalism," Carrie replied, her jaw tightening. "And I expect the same in return, which is why I'm a little confused about where this line of questioning is headed." "I'm just asking the questions that people are wondering about," Bryan said, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. "For instance, there are some very specific stories about your behavior during recording sessions. Producers talking about tantrums when things don't go your way." The camera captured the exact moment Carrie's composure began to crack. Her eyes flashed, and she gripped the arms of her chair. "Tantrums? Are you serious right now? These are industry professionals. Carrie, people with decades of experience. They're not making this stuff up. Industry professionals who apparently don't have the courage to attach their names to these supposed stories." Carrie shot back. "How convenient for them, and how convenient for you to be able to ask me about anonymous gossip and call it journalism." Bryan leaned back, clearly enjoying the reaction he was getting. "So you're denying that you've had heated disagreements with people you work with? What I'm denying is your characterization of normal creative discussions as tantrums, Carrie said, her voice rising slightly. Do you think music gets made by everyone sitting around agreeing with each other all the time? Do you think great art comes from people who don't have strong opinions about their work? But there's a difference between having strong opinions and being difficult to work with, isn't there? Carrie stared at him for a long moment, and viewers could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Bryan, let me ask you something. In your career, have you ever disagreed with a decision your boss made? Have you ever pushed back when someone wanted to take your show in a direction you didn't believe in? Of course, but I'm not sure that's the same thing. Why? Because I'm a woman. Because when a man fights for his artistic vision, he's passionate and dedicated. But when a woman does it, she's difficult and throws tantrums. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Bryan's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, but it looked forced now. I don't think gender has anything to do with this, Carrie, doesn't it? Because I'm looking at your questions, and I'm wondering if you'd be asking a male artist about anonymous rumors calling him difficult. Or would you be asking about his music, his craft, his inspiration? I ask tough questions of everyone who sits in that chair, Bryan replied, his defensive tone betraying his discomfort. Tough questions about their work, or tough questions designed to create drama where none exists. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Carrie's publicist had moved closer to the set, clearly ready to intervene. The camera operators continued filming, but their body language suggested they were witnessing something they hadn't expected. Look, Carrie, Bryan said, trying to regain control of the interview, I think you're overreacting a little bit. These are just questions. If there's no truth to any of this, then just say so, and we can move on. Overreacting, Carrie repeated slowly. There's another word that gets thrown at women a lot, isn't it? When we don't smile and nod and accept whatever's being said about us, we're overreacting. I didn't mean it that way. How did you mean it then? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you came into this interview with a predetermined narrative, and when I don't play along with it, I'm the problem. Bryan shuffled his papers again, clearly stalling for time. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation. About what? About rumors and gossip. About anonymous sources who apparently have nothing better to do than spread stories about how terrible I am to work with. Carrie's voice was getting stronger, more confident, because if that's what you call honest conversation, then I think we have very different definitions of honesty. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft whir of the cameras and the distant sound of Nashville traffic outside the studio windows. Maybe we should take a quick break, Bryan suggested, reaching for his water glass. Maybe we should, Carrie agreed, but she made no move to relax or step away from the interview setup. Instead, she remained in her chair, staring directly at Bryan with an intensity that made it clear this conversation was far from over. But there would be no break. The cameras kept rolling, and after just a few seconds of silence, Bryan decided to double down instead of backing off. Actually, let's keep going, he said, with renewed confidence. I think our listeners deserve to hear your response to some of these concerns that are floating around the industry. Carrie's eyebrows rose. Concerns? Is that what we're calling? Gossip now? Well, when multiple sources are saying the same things, it starts to look like a pattern rather than just gossip. There's the story about what happened during your collaboration sessions last spring. Several musicians have mentioned that you insisted on dozens of takes for a single verse. And when someone suggested maybe trying a different approach, you allegedly said, and I quote, that they clearly didn't understand your artistic vision. Carrie stared at him in disbelief. Are you seriously going to sit there and criticize me for being a perfectionist about my own music? It's not about being a perfectionist, Carrie. It's about how you treat the people around you when things don't go exactly the way you want them to. How I treat people? Carrie's voice was getting sharper now. Producers, musicians, engineers, tour crew, venue staff, radio programmers like yourself. Bryan replied smugly. The words hit the studio like a slap. Even the camera operators exchanged glances. I'm just saying that sometimes people put up with difficult behavior because of what someone brings to the table professionally. It doesn't mean they enjoy the experience. Carrie was quiet for several seconds, and when she spoke again, her voice was dangerously calm. Bryan, I need you to be very clear about what you're suggesting here. Are you saying that my colleagues and collaborators only work with me because they have to, not because they want to? I'm saying that there seem to be a lot of stories about your behavior that paint a picture of someone who might be losing touch with how to treat people. Stories from whom? Give me names. You know I can't reveal my sources. How convenient. How journalism works sometimes is it because I thought journalism was about facts, not rumors. I thought it was about giving people a chance to respond fairly to specific allegations, not vague insinuations designed to make them look bad. I'm just asking questions that people are wondering. About what people? Your listeners. Because I have to say, Bryan, in all my years of meeting fans, doing meet and greets, to the people I work with, you know what they ask me about? My music, my family, my tours, my charitable work, the things that actually matter. But surely you understand that your public persona and your professional behavior might be two different things. My professional behavior. I show up on time. I come prepared. I work harder than anyone else in the room. I remember people's names, I ask about their families, and I say please and thank you. When someone does good work, I tell them. When something isn't working, I explain. What I need differently, that's called being professional. But what about when people don't meet your standards? How do you handle that? The same way any professional handles it. I communicate clearly about what needs to change. But let me ask you something, Bryan. When you have a guest on your show who isn't giving you good answers, what do? Do you just smile and accept it? Or do you try to get better responses? That's different. How is it different? You just spent the last 10 minutes trying to get me to react the way you wanted me to react. When I didn't play along with your narrative, you kept pushing. Is that you being difficult, or is that you doing your job? Bryan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The parallel was obvious, and he clearly hadn't expected Carrie to turn it back on him so effectively. The difference is, he finally said, I'm not getting a reputation for being hard to work with, aren't you? And I've been doing this. For a long time, the studio fell silent, except for the hum of equipment. Bryan's face was reddening slightly, and he seemed to realize that he was losing control of the situation entirely. I think you're being a little dramatic, Carrie. Dramatic. There's another word. Carrie shook her head slowly. You know what? Bryan, I'm starting to see a pattern here, and it's not a very flattering one for you. What's that supposed to mean? I'm overreacting. I'm being dramatic. I'm being difficult. Do you see what you're doing? I'm conducting an interview. No, you're trying to bait me into having an emotional reaction so you can point to it later and say, see, this proves she's difficult to work with. It's like you're trying to create the very behavior you're accusing me of, dude. Because what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's tabloid sensationalism dressed up as legitimate questioning. I'm asking about issues that are relevant to your career and your public image. Based on what? Anonymous sources. That's not reporting, Bryan. That's gossip mongering. The tension had reached a breaking point. Bryan was clearly frustrated that his strategy wasn't working, and Carrie was getting angrier by the minute at the realization that this entire interview had been set up as some kind of gotcha moment. You know what I think is happening here? Carrie continued, her voice steady but fierce. I think you came into this interview with a story already written in your head. And when I didn't give you the sound bites you needed to support that narrative, been on your show, and I'm wondering how many of them you've asked about being difficult to work with. I'm wondering how many of them you've challenged about their perfectionism or their artistic standards. If his success has made him lose touch with how to treat people. Or, if you save those questions for the women, gender has nothing to do with this, doesn't it? They're the same things that get said about any woman who dares to have standards, who dares to speak up for herself, who dares to be successful without apologizing for it. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every word of what was becoming less of an interview and more of a confrontation. Up slowly, we need to have a very different conversation about what just happened here. I mean, this interview is over. But Bryan wasn't ready to let her go. As Carrie stood beside her chair, clearly preparing to leave, he made the decision that would turn this from an uncomfortable interview into a complete disaster. Sit back down, Carrie. We're not finished. Here, the words came out more like a command than a request, and the effect was immediate. Carrie slowly turned back to face him, and the look in her eyes could have frozen the entire studio. I'm sorry, what did you just say to me? Bryan seemed to realize his mistake, but instead of backing down, he doubled down once again. Look, you agreed to do this interview. You can't just walk away because you don't like the questions, can't I? Carrie's voice was dangerously quiet. Now, Bryan, let me explain something to you. I agreed to do an interview about my music, my tour, and my upcoming projects. I did not agree to sit here and be ambushed with anonymous gossip and thinly veiled accusations about my character. These aren't accusations. They're questions based on legitimate industry concerns. Legitimate? According to whom? You keep saying that, but you haven't given me a single verifiable source, a single specific incident, or a single person willing to put their name behind these so-called concerns. Bryan shuffled through his notes again, clearly looking for something to salvage the situation. What about the incident with the Nashville Symphony? There are documented reports about problems during that collaboration. Carrie's eyes flashed. What problems? Be specific, Bryan. What exactly are you referring to? There were reports of creative differences that led to some tensions during rehearsals. Creative differences, Carrie repeated slowly. You mean the fact that I suggested some changes to the arrangement that would better showcase both the orchestra and the vocals, the changes that the conductor himself praised in interviews afterward. Bryan looked down at his notes, clearly realizing he was on shaky ground. Well, there were some reports that you were unhappy with the initial arrangements. Of course, I was unhappy with the initial arrangements. They weren't good enough. That's why we improved them. That's how collaboration works, Bryan. You start with an idea, you refine it, you make it better. The final performance was incredible because we didn't settle for the first draft. But some people felt that you were too demanding during the process. Some people, which people? Give me names. Bryan, if you're going to sit there and accuse me of being demanding, at least have the courage to tell me who's making these accusations. The silence stretched between them again, and it was clear that Bryan had no names to give. He had built this entire line of questioning on rumors and speculation. And now that Carrie was demanding specifics, the whole thing was falling apart. I think you're missing the point, he said, trying one last time to regain control. The point is that there's a pattern of behavior that suggests you might be losing touch with how to work collaboratively with others. That was the final straw. Carrie stepped closer to Bryan's chair, and when she spoke, her voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Let me tell you what I think the real pattern is here. Bryan, I think you've been sitting in this studio for so long, talking to artists who are so grateful for the exposure that they'll smile and nod at whatever you say, that you've forgotten how to treat successful people with respect. Now wait a minute. No, you wait a minute. I came here as a courtesy to you and your listeners. I didn't need this interview. My album is #1. My tour is sold out, and my fans don't need you to tell them who I am or what I'm about. I came here because I thought it would be a nice way to connect with people and talk about my music. Bryan tried to interrupt again, but Carrie held up her hand. But instead of talking about music, instead of asking about my creative process or my inspiration or the stories behind the songs, you decided to turn this into some kind of tabloid hit piece. You decided to ambush me with gossip and rumors and then act surprised when I didn't play along. Carrie, I think you're overreacting again. There's that word again. Overreacting. Tell me something, Bryan. If Keith Urban or Blake Shelton or any other male artist had pushed back against your questions the way I just did, would you tell them they were overreacting? Or would you respect their right to defend themselves? Bryan's face was red now, and his professional composure had completely abandoned him. I treat all my guests the same way. No, you don't, and we both know it, because I've listened to your show, Bryan. I've heard you interview male artists. You ask them about their music, their tours, their families. You don't ask them if success has made them difficult to work with. You don't challenge them about being perfectionists. You don't question their professionalism based on anonymous sources. The truth of her words hung in the air like an indictment. Everyone in the studio could feel it, and the cameras captured every moment of Bryan's growing discomfort. But you know what the most disappointing part of this whole thing is? Carrie continued, her voice softening slightly. It's that you had a chance to do something meaningful here. You had a chance to talk to someone who's spent years in this industry, who's learned things, who's grown as an artist and as a person. You could have asked about the evolution of country music, about the challenges facing artists today, about the balance between artistic integrity and commercial success. She paused, shaking her head sadly. Instead, you chose to focus on whether I'm nice enough, whether I smile enough, whether I make people comfortable enough, as if that's what matters about an artist, as if my job is to make everyone around me feel good instead of making the best music I possibly can. Bryan opened his mouth to respond, but Carrie wasn't finished. Here's what I want your listeners to know, Bryan. I am demanding. I do have high standards. I do expect the people I work with to bring their best effort because that's what I bring every single day. And if that makes me difficult, then I'm proud to be difficult. She reached down and picked up her purse from beside the chair. I'm proud to be the kind of artist who cares enough about her work to fight for it. I'm proud to be the kind of professional who doesn't accept good enough when great is possible. And I'm proud to be the kind of woman who won't sit here and smile while someone tries to tear her down for having standards. Bryan made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Carrie, maybe we can start over. Maybe we can talk about your music after all. Carrie looked at him for a long moment, and there was something like pity in her eyes. Bryan, the time to talk about my music was 20 minutes ago, before you decided to make this personal. You made your choice about what kind of interview this was going to be. Now I'm making mine about how it's going to end. She turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at him one more time. You know what the saddest part is? You actually had good questions about my music written down there. I saw them in your notes when you were shuffling through, looking for more gossip to throw at me. Questions about my songwriting process, about the themes in the new album, about what I've learned over the years. Those would have been interesting questions. Those would have given your listeners something valuable. Bryan looked down at his notes, and sure enough, there they were. Real questions about her artistry, buried beneath the sensationalist gotcha moments he'd chosen to focus on. Instead, but you threw all that away because you thought it would be more interesting to try to make me look bad, Carrie continued. Well, congratulations, Bryan. You got your dramatic moment. I hope it was worth it. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the studio floor. Just before she reached it, she turned back one final time. When people ask me about this interview, and they will, I'm going to tell them exactly what happened here. I'm going to tell them that you had a choice between journalism and gossip, and you chose gossip. I'm going to tell them that you had a choice between treating me with respect and trying to tear me down, and you chose to tear me down. And I'm going to let them decide what that says about you as an interviewer and as a professional. With that, Carrie Underwood walked out of the studio, leaving Bryan White sitting alone with his notes, his cameras, and the uncomfortable silence of a man who had just destroyed his own credibility in pursuit of a cheap headline. The cameras kept rolling for another 30 seconds, capturing Bryan's stunned expression as he stared at the empty chair where one of country music's biggest stars had just delivered a masterclass in standing up for herself. When he finally looked up at the camera, he seemed to remember that this was all being recorded and that somehow he was going to have to explain what had just happened. So what do you think? Was Carrie right to walk out? Or should she have stayed and tried to salvage the interview? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.